Dear students, let's start another class, and we are studying Finance Act 2024. What exactly we are going to cover in today's lecture? Number one, so far what we have studied that whenever you see the gross PPC, so we know that whatever is the amount of gross personal pension contribution, we just increase our basic and higher ed band. This is what we have done. But in today's class, we will learn exactly by what amount you have to increase basic and higher ed band in case of gross PPC. It has a separate rule, which we have not discussed previously. So the number one thing which we are going to study today is whenever you see the gross personal pension contribution by an individual, then what is the rule of increasing the band? That is number one. Number two, that relates to the pension. Then what is the annual allowance for the pension? How much an individual can contribute? Obviously, according to HMRC, as much as you want, you can contribute in pension schemes. But there is a limit. What is that limit? That limit from tax year 23-24 onwards, it is annual allowance limit for the pension is 60,000. So if the contribution exceeds 60, what are the rules? If the contribution is less than 60, then what are the rules? We have to discuss that as well. Number one, we'll be discussing in case of gross PPC, your bands will increase by what amount? How to decide? Second, in case of pension, there's an annual allowance limit, which is 60,000 from tax year 23-24 onwards. Prior to, before 23-24, it was 40,000 pound. Now it has revised to 60. If the contribution exceeds 60, what is the rule? What are the tax implication? If the contribution is less than 60, it means the annual limit you have not utilized fully. So what I am going to do with the unused limit? This is what we are going to discuss. Third and the last topic of today's class will be the annual allowance limit is 60,000 for the pension, yes, but there are two conditions. If both of them are met, if both of the conditions are met, then your annual allowance limit reduces. The question is, sir, will it become zero? It will never become zero. Annual allowance limit will reduce when two conditions are met. What are those two conditions? We are going to discuss, don't worry at all. But the question is, will it become zero? The answer is no. It can never become zero. The minimum annual allowance limit is 10,000 pound. So let me repeat, and then we are going to start. What are we going to cover today? Number one, whenever you see the gross PPC, you have to take a pause because you need to know the band should increase by what amount. It has a separate rule. Second, if you are a member of a registered pension scheme, and we have two registered pension schemes in our syllabus, one is occupational pension scheme and the second is personal pension scheme. So there is an annual allowance limit for the contribution for the pension. From tax year 23-24, it is onwards, it is 60. Prior to that, it was 40. If someone has contributed more, what are the tax implications? If someone has contributed less than that, so what to do with the unused limit? And finally, what are the two conditions? When both of them are met, then annual allowance limit of pension reduces. So let me share the OneNote, and then I've just written the rules so that we can save the time. Just a minute, let me take this. Okay. Just I need a calculator. Okay, now come here. Okay, sure. Let me tell you one thing. You have to memorize all the conditions whenever the conditions they come in any lecture. And second, formats, they will not be given to you. All you need is you have to be really good in memorizing the things. If you're really good, it means your Finance Act 2024 is done. You can pass the paper in first attempt with flying colors. But let me tell you, memorizing these formats is very easy. It's not difficult at all. It's extremely easy. Just a minute. Okay, so this recording is in progress. So whenever there's a gross PPC, you have to take a pause and you need to know exactly by what amount you will increase the basic and higher rate band. So gross PPC bands will increase by, just a minute, increase by lower of. Increase by lower of. One is, leave this part, come here. Higher of 3,600, that's a fixed amount since my childhood. I've not seen changing this amount. The second is total relevant earnings, total of relevant earnings. Trading profit, employment income, income from furnished holiday lettings. Of course, we have not studied property income yet. We don't know what is furnished holiday letting, but don't worry, we will study very soon, inshallah. So first of all, you need to decide higher of 3,600, and the second is total of the relevant earnings. Relevant earnings are three. One is trading profit, second is employment income, and the third one is income from furnished holiday letting. Assuming the total relevant earnings are 40,000. So obviously higher of 3,640, I'll go for 40. Now this 40 will be compared with gross PPC, assuming the gross PPC is 35,000. Now look at this. Lower of gross PPC and 40. So I will increase the bands, basic and higher, by 3,500. 35,000. So students, whenever you see there's a gross PPC, you have to take a pause and then decide by using this format that bands should increase by what amount. For example, let's say part A, assuming gross PPC by an individual is 50,000 pound. Assuming the gross PPC is 50,000 pound, okay, an examiner says it has employment income, let's say 30,000. Income which is coming from furnished holiday letting, it is, let's say, 40. An examiner is asking us only one thing, that bands, just tell me the amount by which basic and high rate band will increase. So look at this. Bands, they will increase lower of. One is gross PPC, which is in my example 50,000. The second is total relevant earnings. In the question, examiner has given us two earnings, so I'll take both of them. Trading profit is not given, I will not take it. If it is not given, so not to do anything. Your employment income is 30, which is a relevant earning, and income which is coming from furnished holiday letting, which is 40. If I add both of them, here it says higher of 3,600 and total relevant earning, which is 70. So higher of is 70. Now 70 will be compared with gross PPC, whichever is lower. So obviously 50,000 is lower. So your basic and high rate band will increase by 50,000. In that case, now examiner is asking calculate how much HMRC has paid, because we have studied whatever individual pays, that is 80% and 20% is paid by HMRC. So here tax relief means the amount which HMRC has paid. Tax relief is 20% of 50,000. So it means that in part A, in example A, logically 10,000 is paid by HMRC, 40 is paid by the individual. Let's see one more example so that I can bring more clarity. Assuming the gross PPC is £40,000 and we have employment income which is 30,000. The requirement are, number one, bands, basic and let's say higher rate bands will increase by what amount? You have to first tell us the bands will increase by what amount. And the second is tax relief. Tax relief means how much is paid by HMRC. Okay. First of all, let us see the bands will increase by lower of. Bands will increase by lower of. Gross PPC in my part B example, it says 40,000. Now you have to opt higher of. 3,600 and the second is total of the relevant earnings. There are three earnings. They are considered as relevant earnings. One is trading profit. The second is employment income. And the third is income which is coming from furnished holiday letting. In this question, examiner has given us only one, which is employment income, 30,000. So obviously the higher is 30. Now listen and listen carefully. This 30 and 40, both of them will compare and bands will increase by lower of. Can I say this time? The basic and high rate bands will increase by 30,000. Because the rule says bands will increase by lower of. So this time it is not gross PPC amount. This time it is 30,000. Okay. So the first answer is basic rate band and let's say high rate band. We know that limit of the basic rate band is 37,700. High rate ends at 1,25,140. But here in part B, they both will increase by 30,000. Okay. Whatever the revised limits comes. Third point is tax relief. Tax relief means how much HMRC has paid. Now listen carefully. Logically, HMRC pays 20% of the amount by which your bands are increased. Repeat. Logically, HMRC pays 20% of the amount by which your bands limits are increased. In part B, the band limits are increased by 30,000, which means that tax relief means the amount which is paid by HMRC. So the tax relief is 20% of 30,000, which is 6. Now listen and listen carefully. If 6,000 is paid by HMRC, now the next requirement is assuming examiner is asking you, tell us exactly actual payment of the individual. Actual payment of the individual into personal pension contribution. Examiner has given us the gross PPC 40. Now look at this. Actual payment by individual. Actual payment by this individual is the gross is 40, but this time 6,000 is only paid by HMRC. Logically, the outflow of individual is 34,000. So these rules are very important. Let me repeat. HMRC pays 20% of that amount by which your basic and high rate band increases. And it is not always the gross PPC. It could be other than that. You can see here in part B. So it means If tax relief means the amount which is paid by HMRC, if HMRC has paid 6,000 and the examiner says gross PPC is 40, so individual actually has paid 34,000. Now I'm just writing part C and I want you, all of you, pause the video, attempt the question. C. Let's say the gross PPC we have 5,000. Gross PPC is 5. Total of relevant earnings 0. This individual does not have any trading profit. This individual does not have any employment income, does not have any income which is coming from furnished holiday letting. So that is where the total relevant earnings are 0 requirement. This individual has other incomes but does not have employment income, trading income, income from furnished holiday letting. Requirements. Basic rate and higher rate bands. They will increase by what amount? This is. Second is tax relief means how much HMRC has paid. Third, actual, let's say this data belongs to Mr. Y. Actual payment by Mr. Y. Now I really want you pause the video, attempt the question, then you can of course unpause the video. Okay. Number one, the gross PPC is 5,000. Total relevant earnings are 0. Now listen to me carefully. We compare total relevant earnings with 3,600 and we opt whichever is higher. First of all, we need to decide higher of 3,600 and the total of relevant earnings. Here, Mr. Y does not have any relevant earnings. Relevant earnings are 0. So obviously, when I'm going to compare 0 with 3,600, so higher of is 3,600. Now listen. Bands, they will increase by lower of gross PPC, which is 5,000. Higher of is 3,600. And total relevant earnings. In our question, the total relevant earnings are 0. 0 when I'm comparing this with 3,600. So obviously higher of is 3,600. Now, 3,600 and 5,000, whichever is lower. So obviously 3,600 is lower. So bands will increase by 3,600. Bands will increase by 3,600. Next question is tax relief. As I already mentioned. Tax relief means the amount which HMRC has paid. HMRC pays 20% of that amount by which your bands are increased. Here they are increased by 3,600, which means that tax relief is 3,600 into 20%. I believe 720. Let's see, better to check. 720 is paid by HMRC. If 720 is paid by HMRC, then what is the actual contribution of Mr. Y? Actual payment of Mr. Y. Gross PPC is 5,000, but 720 is paid by HMRC. So here comes his actual payment. 5,000 minus 720. It is 4,280. So now, students, I strongly believe you should be having a really good grip that whenever in the question you see gross PPC, take a pause and decide. Then bands, they will increase by what amount? First of all, get higher of 3,600 and total of the relevant earnings. Relevant earnings are three: trading income, employment income, income which is coming from furnished holiday letting. Total of the relevant earning is compared with the 3,600, whichever is higher. Then that higher of amount is compared with the gross PPC, whichever is lower. Bands will increase by the lower of. Okay, next point. Tax relief is always 20% of the amount by which your bands are increased. Okay. So let me repeat and then I'll go to the new rule. Whenever in the question, you students, you see gross personal pension contribution, you have to take a pause and then decide that bands should increase by what amount. That's it. Now let's move ahead. The next rule is, come here. Next rule, I want to discuss this one. How much an individual in UK can contribute to pension schemes? As much as they want. Repeat. Individuals can contribute as much as they want. Next point. According to HMRC, there's a limit on annual allowance of pension. Annual allowance of pension means how much an individual can contribute. That is 60,000. But the limit of 60,000 applies from tax year 23-24 onwards. Prior to tax year 23-24, it was 40,000. Now listen to me carefully. If individual contributes less than 60,000, it means the entire limit is not used. Okay. When entire limit is not used, then unused limit is carried forward for 3 next tax years. Unused limit carried forward for how many years? Next 3 tax years. And used on FIFO basis. How? I'll show you. But let me repeat. Annual allowance limit for the pension is 60,000. If someone has contributed less than 60, then unused limit is carried forward for next 3 tax years utilized on FIFO basis. Let us first stick to that. Number one, the annual allowance limit is 60, and this annual allowance limit is 60,000 is only applicable for those individuals. They are member of registered pension scheme, either occupational pension scheme or PPC, any one of them. And in your syllabus, both the registered pension schemes are there. One is occupational pension scheme, another is personal pension scheme. Okay. So the limit is 60,000, but whatever rules now we are going to discuss, that unused limit will be carried forward for 3 tax years, utilized on FIFO basis. These rules are only applicable when you are a member of a registered pension scheme, at least one of them, either OPPC or PPC. Let's see, how does this annual allowance limit utilize? Okay. Annual allowance limit is 60,000 less employees contribution in occupational pension plan. Let's say if employee is contributing in OPPC, deduct that. If employee is contributing in personal pension, then deduct gross PPC. If your employer is very nice, an employer is contributing for the employee either in occupational pension plan or in a personal pension plan, if employer is contributing, that will also be deducted. So the limit of 60,000 is consumed by individual's contribution in occupational pension plan, individual gross PPC. If your employer, let's say you are an employee and your employer for you is contributing either an occupational pension plan or personal pension plan or in both of them, that will also consume the limit of this £60,000. If you ask me, I would say most of the time your employer will be contributing for you in occupational pension plan. But main concept is how this limit gets consumed. Number one, when an individual is contributing, let's say your individual is an employee is contributing in occupational pension plan, your limit gets consumed. If you are contributing in being an employee, your gross PPC consumes this limit. If your employer is contributing for you, again, this limit will be consumed. Now, let's say we have a positive amount means unused limit. Unused annual allowance is carried forward for 3 tax years and used on FIFO basis. Now, let me explain that first. The rule of unused. Assuming that, I'm just assuming, okay, in the tax year 2021, the annual allowance limit is obviously 40,000, as I mentioned. Annual allowance limit is 60 from tax year 23-24 onwards. Prior to that, it was 40. Okay. Annual allowance is 40, and let's say we have just one gross PPC, nothing else. We have gross PPC 20. Make it 15. Okay. We do not have any other contribution. Let's say we just have 15,000 gross PPC. We do not have any contribution in occupational pension plan, and we do not have any employer's contribution. So what is the unused limit? Unused limit is 25. Okay. Now this is the scenario. Let me make it more valuable. Annual allowance. Tax sale. Now it is more bad. 2021-22 annual allowance is 40, and let's say this individual has contributed 30. Unused is 10,000. 22-23, it is 40, and this individual has contributed 40. We do not have any unused. Okay. 23-24 annual allowance limit is 60, and this individual has contributed, let's say, 40. We have unused 20. Okay. Let's say current tax year is 2024-25. Current tax year is 2024-25. And the requirement is, what is the annual allowance of 2024-25? Number one. Second, how much unused annual allowance is available to be used in tax year 2024-25? Now listen and listen carefully. First of all, always current year annual allowance limit will be used, and after that, we will utilize any unused limit. Repeat. The rule is always first utilize current year annual allowance limit. After that, you will be using unused annual allowance limit. Okay. What is the annual allowance for the tax year 24-25? It is £60,000. It is 60. Now, we need to see how much unused limit will be available to be used in tax year 24-25. Let's see. Come in. Now listen and listen carefully. Let me use unused limit can be carried forward for 3 tax years. How many? 3. Now listen. 2020-21 unused is 25. Now this unused can be carried forward. How many tax years? 3. 3 means 1, 2, and 3. But examiner is not asking for the tax year 23-24. Examiner is asking how much unused annual allowance is available for the tax year 24-25. Can I say the unused limit of 2020-21 cannot be carried forward for the tax year 24-25 because it does not fall in next 3 years. It falls in next 4 years. And the rule says unused limit of annual allowance can only be carried forward for how many years? Next 3 years. Okay. Now look at this. Unused in 21-22 is 10,000. This can be carried forward for how many tax years? 3. 1, 2, and obviously 24-25, 3. So it means unused limit of 10,000 is available and unused limit of 20 is available. Which means that how much unused annual allowance is available? That is 30,000. Now let me tell you one more thing. How did I get this 30, 10 and 20? Let me clear one more concept. What is not possible? You cannot do this. Some of the students, they think, okay, sir, this 25, we cannot carry forward to 24-25 because tax year 24-25 is not falling in next 3 years. But why not? We can carry forward this 25 to tax year 21-22, then 10,000 plus 25 total becomes 35. No, you can't do that. Whenever we are going to utilize unused limit, that unused limit will be carried forward for 3 tax years and utilized on FIFO basis. You cannot do this that 10,000 of 21-22 and 25 of 20-21, if you add them, they becomes 35. And now you are saying, I want to carry forward the 35,000 unused for the next 3 tax year. No, you cannot do that. The next 3 years carry forward is actually applicable on each tax year's unused amount. I cannot add 2 to 3 unused annual allowance and then I carry forward them. So 3-year rule is applicable on each. So 25,000 unused cannot be utilized in the tax year 24-25 because it is not falling in the next 3-year tax years. It actually falls in next 4 tax years. I hope it is now clear. Then what is the rule of unused limit? Let me repeat. Unused annual allowance is carried forward for 3 tax years, number 1, and utilized on FIFO basis. Now, what do you mean by FIFO? Let me clear that also. For example, the current tax year is 2024-25. Number 1, if I go 3 tax years back, 23-24, 22-23, and 21-22. Okay. Assuming we have unused annual allowance, here I have unused annual allowance 10,000. Here I have unused 15. Here I have 25. Current year annual allowance. Let's say annual allowance of the current year is 60,000. This is the data. Current year unused limit is, we know that current year is 60,000. Okay. Now listen. In tax year 2024-25, gross PPC is 80,000. In tax year 24-25, the gross PPC is 80 required. How much annual allowance unused? can be carried forward for tax year 25-26? Repeat. The current tax year is 2024-25. In the current tax year, gross PPC is 80. And examiner is asking us how much annual allowance unused is carried forward for the tax year 25-26. Okay. Now listen to me carefully. First of all, current year, annual allowance limit will be utilized. After that, we'll see if we have any unused limits in the previous 3 tax years, then that will be utilized on FIFO basis, which means that, now come here. Obviously, the unused limit of 21-22 can be utilized in the tax year 24-25. Why it can be used? Because unused limit can be carried forward for 3 tax years. And obviously, if I count 3 tax year for the unused limit of 21-22, then it is 1, 2, and 3. So that's for sure. Unused limit of 21-22 can be used in the tax year 24-25. But how do we use that is very important. First of all, we will use current year annual allowance limit. So the gross PPC is 80. I have used 60. Still 20,000 I want to deduct. Remaining 20,000 of the gross PPC will be utilized in previous 3 tax years on FIFO basis. So it means, first of all, I'll be using the unused limit of 21-22. Then I will use unused limit of 22-23. This is the meaning of FIFO. So number one, what to do? First, from the current tax year, go back to 3 tax years. First, from the current tax year for which you are solving the question, go 3 tax years back and then start utilizing the unused limits on FIFO basis, first in, first out. Now, still we have unused limit of 22-23, 5,000. We do have unused limit of 25. Now listen and listen carefully. Examiner has asked one more question. How much unused limit will be carried forward for tax year 25-26? So unused limit can be carried forward for how many tax years? 3. Unused limit of 22-23. Unused limit of 22-23 can be carried forward for the tax year 25-26. Why? Because unused limit of 22-23 can be carried forward for the next 3 years. For next 3 years. If you count the time period, 1, 2, and 3. So logically 25-26 falls in the next 3 tax years. So that is why unused limit of 22-23 can be carried forward for the tax year 25-26. This 5,000 can be carried forward, and obviously this 25 also. It means unused, which is carried forward as total is 30,000. This 5 and this 25. So now I strongly believe one more concept should be clear to everyone. If contribution is less than the annual allowance limit, then unused annual allowance limit is carried forward for 3 tax years and utilized on FIFO basis. And when it comes to the utilization of annual allowance limit, first of all, we use current year annual allowance limit, and then we check, do we have any unused limit in the previous 3 tax years? If yes, then apply FIFO basis on utilizing the unused limit. Okay, now. Next question is, what if the contribution is more than the annual allowance limit? Then what to do? Come here. This is the annual allowance limit. And let's say employee has contributed in occupational pension plan, gross PPC is there. Employer has also contributed in any of the schemes or both of the schemes for employee. Now, let me tell you one more thing. Whenever if your employer is so nice and contributes for you in personal pension plan, that way you are not going to gross it up that. Only when an individual for himself or herself is contributing in personal pension plan, then you will be grossing it up. If your employer contributes for you in the personal pension plan, you will not gross it up. Whatever is the employer's contribution, just deduct that from your annual allowance limit. Repeat. PPC will only be grossed up when an individual is contributing in PPC for himself or herself. When your employer is contributing for you in personal pension plan, you will not gross it up. Okay, now, assuming the contribution is more than the available limit, the final answer is negative. If the contribution is more than the annual allowance limit, then what to do? Listen carefully. Excess contribution is annual allowance charge. If the contribution is more than the annual allowance limit, that is called annual allowance charge, and annual allowance charge is taxed as non-saving income. And you will tax that annual allowance charge after all the incomes. After all the income means after the dividend income. You will apply the tax rates on annual allowance charge, and those tax rates, they will be from the non-saving income. So let's make it more easier for you. If the actual contribution is more than the annual allowance limit, then excess contribution is called annual allowance charge. Simply we treat annual allowance charge as non-saving income. Simply, we treat annual allowance charge as non-saving income. And on that non-saving income, you will pay the tax, and the tax rates, they are applicable from non-saving income. But the rule says you will tax the annual allowance charge after all other sources of income. After all other sources of income means, excuse me, even after the dividend income. So first of all, you have to normally tax your non-saving income, saving income, dividend income. And after that, if there is any annual allowance charge, you have to apply the tax rate on that annual allowance charge. Now listen carefully. I want to just hold on the video here. In a coming class, what I'm going to do, I'm going to explain more on this annual allowance charge. We'll be discussing more on this annual allowance charge. Plus, we did not discuss what are the two conditions. When both the conditions are met, then your annual allowance limit reduces. So I don't want this video to be very long. Then in the next video, we are going to cover the remaining area which we did not cover here. One is if the contribution is more than the annual allowance limit, that is annual allowance charge treated as non-saving income. Number one, I have to cover that. Plus, when two conditions are met, what are those two conditions? If both the conditions are met, then annual allowance limit from 60, it reduces. When it reduces, how it works, we'll cover this in the next lecture. So I deliberately don't want this video to be very long. So thank you very much. See you all inshallah in the next class.